I told my son I was dying on a Thursday afternoon in March. Not with a shaking voice, not with tears, not with any of the theater a weaker man might have needed to get through it. I told him the way you tell someone, something that has already settled into the furniture of your life, quietly, across the kitchen table. My hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone lukewarm, the afternoon light cutting low through the blinds. I said, "Walter, I have to tell you something. The doctors found something on the scan. Stage 4. They're giving me months, not years." I watched his face the way you watch weather move across a field. And my son, my 41-year-old son, who I had carried on my shoulders through the Ohio State Fair, who had learned to shave standing next to me in my bathroom mirror, who had sat across this same table every Sunday of his childhood, said 4 words before he could stop himself. He said, "So the house then?" Not, "Dad, no." Not, "What can I do?" 4 words, flat and fast, already doing arithmetic before his face caught up to what his mouth had done. Then he caught it. He rearranged himself. He said he was in shock, that he misspoke, that of course he wasn't thinking about the house, he was thinking about me, and wasn't it just like his brain to short-circuit into practical things when it couldn't handle the real thing? He talked for almost 5 minutes walking that sentence backward, trying to bury it under enough words that I'd forget the order they came in. But I don't forget order. 40 years of running payroll for other men's mistakes teaches you to notice sequence. He hadn't said no first. He hadn't said how first. He'd said the house. I do not have stage 4 anything. There is no scan. My health is, as far as any doctor has ever told me, entirely unremarkable for a man of 68. I built that lie by hand, the way you'd build a cabinet, with care and with purpose, because for the better part of a year something had been gathering weight in my chest, and I needed to know its shape before I let it keep growing in the dark. What I heard 2 days later, standing in my own garage with the door half down, was worse than the house. Worse by a margin I am still finding the bottom of. Welcome, neighbor, to another one from me. If you're new here, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what town you're writing in from, because I read every one of them. Let's get into it. My name is Walter Doyle Kessler, though everybody past the 3rd grade has called me Doyle. I'm 68 years old and I live on Bramblewood Court in a town called Marietta, Ohio, in a 2-story colonial I've owned since Reagan's 2nd term. 38 years in this house. Long enough that I've replaced the roof twice, the water heater 3 times, and buried a dog under the maple in the back corner that my late wife Ruth planted the year we moved in. I spent 41 years running a commercial HVAC company, Kessler Climate Systems, that I started in a rented garage with a used van and a business loan my own father co-signed against his better judgment. I grew it into a company with 52 employees, contracts across 3 counties, and enough of a reputation that when I finally sold it in the fall of 2021, the buyer flew in from Cleveland just to shake my hand in person before the ink dried. Ruth passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, the fast and merciless kind. Diagnosed in February and gone by August. She kept the books for the company for 19 years, and there is not a spreadsheet I have opened since her funeral that I have not, in some small, private way, missed her handwriting in the margins of. After she was gone, I ran the business 2 more years out of stubbornness more than sense, and then I sold it, and the number the sale brought in is a number I intend to come back to because it matters to everything that follows. I have 2 sons. Walter Jr., who goes by Walt, is 41, lives 25 minutes away in Parkersburg, just across the river in West Virginia, and works as a commercial real estate broker, a job that fits him the way certain jobs fit certain men. He is very good at figuring out what a thing is worth to someone else, before that someone else has finished figuring it out for himself. He has Ruth's laugh and Ruth's easy charm, and I mention that because that laugh and that charm have made it harder than it should have been for me to see him clearly, for longer than I'm proud of. My younger son, Marcus, is 37, lives in Columbus, 2 hours north, and works as a physical therapist at a veterans hospital. Marcus calls me every Sunday night at 8 o'clock. Not most Sundays. Every Sunday, for going on 8 years now, missed exactly once, the week his daughter was born, and even that week he called from the hospital hallway at 11 at night to apologize for being a few hours late. That tells you the kind of man Marcus is. The kind who apologizes for being late to a phone call on the night his daughter came into the world. Marcus did not know anything about the test. Nobody knew. Not my accountant, not my attorney, not my old friend Hollis Faber, who I've known since we were both 19 and stacking pallets on the same loading dock. and who I told everything only after it was already finished. The test was mine alone, built quietly over the better part of 2 months, because something had been accumulating for longer than that, and a man does not confront a suspicion until he has looked at it hard enough to know it isn't just his own tired imagination playing games with him. It had started small, the way these things do. Walt had mentioned, almost in passing, over Thanksgiving, that the Bramblewood house was a lot of square footage for one guy. He'd asked, not long after, whether the sale of the business had been structured as a lump sum or spread out, phrasing it as idle curiosity, the way you'd ask about the weather somewhere you weren't planning to visit. Marcus had mentioned once, offhand, that Walt had called him just checking in on Dad's situation, which Marcus found unremarkable, because Marcus finds most things Walt does unremarkable. He has spent his whole life extending his older brother the kind of benefit of the doubt that Walt has been withdrawing against for 3 decades without ever making a brand deposit. I found it remarkable. I found the pattern of small financial questions remarkable, in the specific way a man who built a company from a rented garage learns to find patterns remarkable, which is to say, I noticed it before I had a name for it, and once I had the name, I could not put it back down. So I built the test. I asked my doctor, an old friend named Curtis Yoon, who has treated me for 20 years, and who agreed, reluctantly, uneasily, and only after I explained exactly why, to write me a single sheet on his letterhead. Not a forged diagnosis, exactly nothing that would ever leave my kitchen table or be shown to another living soul, just enough of a document, sitting face down under a coffee mug, to make my own performance airtight if I needed to lean on it. I called Walt on a Tuesday and asked if he could come by Thursday for dinner, just the two of us, since Marcus was in Columbus. He said of course, and he arrived 7 minutes early, which Walt only ever does when he suspects something is happening. We ate. We cleared the plates. We sat with coffee the way Ruth and I used to sit with him on Sunday evenings when he still lived under this roof. And then I told him. Stage 4. Months. Not years. So the house then. 4 words. Unguarded. True. In a way nothing else he said for the next 5 minutes would be. The recovery after it was almost more revealing than the words themselves, because I watched him do the math in real time, watched him fold the sentence back into something that could pass for shock. I watched the concern arrive about 90 seconds too late to be anything but a performance for an audience of one. I have spent 4 decades watching men calculate things across a negotiating table, and Walt was calculating fast, but not fast enough, and I could read every line of it. We talked another hour. He was warm. He was helpful. He said he'd look into options. He said not to make any big decisions under stress. He said he had contacts who could get me a real number on the house if it came to that. He said we. I thanked him for coming. I told him I loved him, which was true regardless of anything else happening between us, and I meant it the way you mean the truest thing you say in a conversation full of half-true things. He offered to stay over, since it was getting late and I'd had a hard day, and I told him the guest room was made up the way it's always made up. He took me up on it. I want you to sit for a second in the space between that offer and what happened 2 mornings later, because that space is where this story stopped being about a diagnosis and became about something else entirely. I'm an early riser, 41 years of 5 a.m. Service calls does something to a man's internal clock that retirement doesn't undo. I was up at 5:40, in the kitchen with coffee by 6. Walt didn't know I was up. The guest room sits over the garage, and the garage has a side door that lets out onto the driveway, and I have lived in this house long enough to know that voices carry strangely from that side door up through the kitchen vent when the furnace fan kicks on, which it does automatically at 6 a.m. every single morning of the heating season, a fact Walt apparently never had reason to learn in the years he lived here as a teenager, because teenagers don't stand in garages at 6 a.m., making phone calls they don't want their fathers to hear. I heard the garage door groan up about 4 inches, just enough to duck under, and then his voice, low and businesslike, the register he uses with people he isn't bothering to charm. He said, "Yeah, it's confirmed. He told me Thursday night. Stage 4. They're not giving him long." A pause. I know. Listen, before hospice gets involved and before anybody official starts sniffing around the estate, I want us positioned. The Bramblewood lot, that square footage, that street in this market that's an 840-860 house, easy, maybe more if we stage it right. Another pause. Longer this time. He's not going to know the difference, Danny. He hasn't sold real estate in his life. That was never his business. HVAC guys don't know square footage pricing. If we come in around 690, Present it through your LLC as a straightforward cash offer from a guy who wants a quiet closing before he passes. He signs it. Grateful even, and we flip it in 90 days for 150, maybe 180,000 clear. I stood at my own kitchen counter and did not move a muscle. The business money. I'm still working that angle, he said. He never talks numbers. But a company that size, that many years, there's real money sitting somewhere, and if he needs somebody to help manage it once things get bad, I want to be the guy he calls first. Another pause, and his voice dropped even lower, and the vent carried it anyway. Marcus isn't going to be a problem. Marcus trusts me. He's always trusted me. I'll handle Marcus, my younger son, the one who calls every single Sunday at 8 o'clock without fail. I'll handle Marcus. I stood there with my mug in my hand and felt something in the center of my chest go very still. The particular stillness that comes when a suspicion you've been carrying around finally puts on a shape you can see the edges of. The shape had a name, and the name wasn't complicated. It was betrayal, the plain domestic kind, the kind where a man looks at his dying father as he believed me to be, and sees not a father but an opportunity with a closing date on it. I set the mug down without a sound and stood in that kitchen until I heard the garage door groan shut and his footsteps come back up toward the guest room. When he came down 20 minutes later, he was cheerful in the specific way of a man who has just made a very good phone call. He said good morning. I poured him coffee and set it in front of him and sat down across the table the way I had 100 Sunday mornings before. Walt, I said, I've been thinking about what I told you. He looked at me with the particular attentiveness of a man listening for one specific thing, hidden inside a general sentence. I think I need some time before I make any decisions about the house. I want to talk to an estate attorney, and I think I need to talk to your brother. Something moved through his face that wasn't quite alarm and wasn't quite disappointment. A recalculation. A man silently moving a deadline in his head. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need, Dad. Whatever you need. He left after breakfast. I went to my den, picked up the phone, and I did not call an estate attorney first. I called Marcus. Marcus picked up on the second ring, even though it wasn't Sunday, because he heard something in my voice inside the first 3 words. He said, Dad, what's wrong? Not as a question, but as a demand. I told him everything, the fake diagnosis, the dinner, the 4 words, the garage, the vent, the number, the 90 days, and finally, the part about himself. Marcus went quiet for a long time, the specific quiet of a man rebuilding his understanding of someone he's trusted his whole life. He said he'd handle me. Marcus finally repeated, not really a question. Yes, I said. Another silence, longer. Dad, he said, how much did the business actually sell for? I told him. I heard him exhale slowly on the other end, the sound of a man doing new math and landing somewhere much larger than he'd been steered toward. He told me 2 years ago you barely broke even on the sale. Marcus said that you were worried about covering your own expenses, that I shouldn't bring up money with you because it stressed you out. 2 years. Walt had been laying that groundwork with his brother for 2 full years, running 2 separate stories in parallel, one for me and one for Marcus, both of them engineered so that when the moment came, neither of us would have any reason to question whatever number he showed up with. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. I need you to sit on this for now, I said. And I need the name of a good estate attorney, if you've got one. He had one. Of course he did. Marcus is the kind of man who has the name you need 3 weeks before you know you're going to need it. Not because he's calculating, but because he pays attention and files things away out of simple decency. The attorney's name was Renata Ose, an office on Front Street in downtown Marietta, and Marcus described her the way you'd describe someone you trust with something important, careful, thorough, and entirely unimpressed by charm. I called her the next morning. She listened without a single interruption for 11 straight minutes, and when I finished, she asked me one question. Mr. Kessler, do you have documentation of the actual business sale? Real numbers, not what you've told your sons. I told her I had the full closing package and an accountant who'd handled my books for 22 years. Good, she said. And the phone call in the garage, did you record any of it? I hadn't thought to. She was quiet a moment. That's all right. The 4 words at dinner, combined with the content of that call and the documented financial reality underneath it, gives us a very clear picture, even without a recording. What I want to do is build a complete, notarized asset picture in writing, so there's no version of your finances anyone can dispute later. And I want to revise your estate documents before your son takes any further steps, because from what you've described, he's already moving on a timeline. How soon can you see me? I asked. Tomorrow morning, she said. 7:30. I was there at 7:15. Renata Osei in person was exactly what her phone manner had suggested, unhurried, exact, the calm of a woman who had walked families through this particular kind of ugliness enough times to know precisely where every step led before she took it. She had me tell the whole story again in order while she wrote in small, dense handwriting on a legal pad, and when I finished, she started a list. Business sale documentation, full asset statement from my accountant, current will and trust documents, a dated, signed, as verbatim as possible written account of the dinner and the garage conversation. How much weight does a written account carry without a recording? I asked. Combined with everything else, considerable weight, she said. You are not filing charges, Mr. Kessler, not today. You are documenting your actual financial position and revising your estate to reflect your actual intentions. The garage conversation is supporting context. The foundation is the numbers. And the numbers, once she pulled them together over the following week, were not small. The company sale, $2.1 million, part cash at closing and part a 5-year earnout, 3 years of which had already paid out in full. The Bramblewood house, independently appraised that same week at $870,000. Retirement accounts and investments, another $940,000, built slowly and stubbornly across 4 decades of a man who never once in his working life carried a credit card balance past 30 days. All told, just north of $4 million, held by a man his own son believed was dying broke and was preparing to walk into an $870,000 house for $690,000 through a stranger's LLC before hospice ever got involved. Sit with that gap for a second. $180,000 of daylight between what the house was worth and what Walt planned to offer for it, a number he already knew, because he'd said it himself in a cold garage before 6 in the morning, while his father stood 12 feet away holding a coffee mug and listening through a heating vent. Renata revised the documents over the following 4 days, and I want to be precise about what changed and what didn't, because both halves of it matter. Marcus's position did not change. He had earned his place in that will honestly across 37 years, and nothing I'd learned changed one true thing about our relationship. What changed was Walt's, though not to nothing. I want to be clear about that too, because this was never built as punishment. It was built as accuracy. And accuracy meant the document finally reflecting the relationship as it actually stood instead of the relationship. Walt had spent 2 years quietly manufacturing. His share was restructured to a fixed, documented sum, one that accounted honestly for every loan across his adult life that had never once been repaid, every bit of quiet support that had never once been acknowledged, leaving him something, but not what he had positioned himself to take. The Bramblewood house went into a trust with Renata as independent trustee. It cannot be sold without her written sign-off and a fresh independent appraisal within 60 days of any offer. No family member, and no entity connected to a family member, can serve as buyer or buyer's agent on that property. Full stop. Marcus was named co-trustee. I called him the afternoon the papers were filed and told him. He went quiet, and then he said, "Dad, you didn't have to do that." And I told him I knew, and that's exactly why it meant something. He laughed, small and real, the laugh of a man hearing a sentence in a form he half recognized from somewhere else in his life. The documents were signed, notarized, and filed on a Friday, 12 days after I'd told my son I was dying, and he'd said, "So the house then," before he could stop himself. On Saturday morning I called Walt. "If you're still with me, neighbor, drop a comment and tell me what you'd have said to him in that call, because how I finally said it is the part of this story that took me the longest to get right. Hit that like button while you're there." Walt answered on the first ring, the way he'd been answering all week, which told me something about how closely he'd been watching that phone. "Dad," he said, warm and immediate, "how are you feeling? I've been thinking about you nonstop." "I'm doing fine," I said. "I want to talk through some things. Can you come by this afternoon?" "Of course. Absolutely." "What time?" 3. I said. He was there at 2:50, wearing the same practiced warmth he'd worn all week, the warmth of a man who believes the situation is bending in the direction he wants it to bend. I sat him at the kitchen table. I put coffee in front of him, and then I said, "Walt, before I tell you anything else, I need you to hear one true thing first. I love you. That's true no matter what I say in the next 10 minutes. and I need you to hold on to that while I say it." He looked at me, and something small and involuntary moved across his face, the first flicker of understanding that this wasn't the conversation he'd walked in expecting. "I'm not dying," I said. "There is no scan. There is no stage 4. I built that so I could see something clearly, and I saw it." Silence. He didn't move. "CCC. I told you I was dying because I needed to know something," I said. "And you told me before you could stop yourself." 4 words. "Walt, before the shock even had time to reach your face, you'd already told me what mattered most to you." He put both hands flat on the table and said nothing. "Thursday morning, in the garage," I said. "The vent carries sound straight up into this kitchen when the furnace kicks on. I've lived in this house 38 years. I know exactly how it moves." His face went the specific pale of a man reconstructing an entire week in his head and watching every version of it come out wrong. "Dad," he said, "the house is worth almost 900. I have an independent appraisal from this week that says 870. I said, "You were going to offer 690 through Danny's LLC and call it a fair cash number for a grieving man. I know the number because you said it out loud while I stood at my own kitchen counter." He didn't try to deny it. 5. I'll give him that much. He sat there with his hands flat on the table and did not attempt to construct a version of events where what I'd just described hadn't happened, and something in me softened half a degree at that, because it told me there was still a person under the calculation who recognized the exact moment the calculation was finished. "The estate's been revised and filed," I said. "Renata Osei, downtown on Front Street. The house is in a trust now. Independent trustee. Terms that make what you were planning impossible no matter how you structure it. Marcus is co-trustee." Walt closed his eyes. "Did you tell him about the garage?" he asked. "I told him everything," I said, "including that you said you'd handle him." He opened his eyes and looked at the table for a long time. "Walt," I said, "I'm going to tell you exactly what I told your brother I needed from you. I need the truth, not the managed version, the actual shape of whatever you're in, because a man doesn't build a plan like that one around a healthy father, and I don't think you built it around a dying one either. I think you built it around trouble you haven't told anyone about." He looked up. "Are you in trouble?" I asked. A long pause, the kind with real weight sitting in it. "Yeah," he said. "Tell me," I said. And he did. Slowly. In pieces. The way truth comes out of a man who's been compressing it for a long time. A commercial deal in Marietta that had gone sideways when 2 anchor tenants pulled out inside of 6 months. A second deal he'd leveraged to cover the first that hadn't resolved either. Personal guarantees on both. That meant the exposure wasn't just professional. It was his house, his savings, his marriage on the line if it came apart the wrong way. He wasn't broke, not yet, but he could see broke from where he was standing. And somewhere in that fear my house had started looking less like my house and more like a bridge. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I sat with it a moment. "You should have called me," I said. He looked at the table. "Not to take something," I said. "To ask. There's a version of this where you called me 8 months ago and said, 'Dad, I'm in real trouble, and I need help.' And we'd have had a very different 8 months than the ones we actually had." I paused. "I don't know if I'd have bailed you out. I want to be honest with you about that. What you were planning tells me something about your judgment I'm still sitting with. But I would have listened. I would have had the conversation." Walt put his hand over his eyes and sat like that a while. "Dad," he finally said, "I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "The will," he said. What changed?" "It's accurate," I said. "It reflects the relationship, as it's actually been. If that relationship changes over the years ahead, I'll revisit it, because I'm not interested in punishing you. I'm interested in the truth, and the truth starts today with the actual one, not the managed one." He nodded slowly. "Where do I start?" he asked. "With your own attorney," I said. "Tomorrow, before anything else. And you tell them the whole picture, not the version you've been telling everyone else." He nodded again. "And then you call your brother," I said. "Not me calling to tell him what you said. You call him yourself." Walt looked at the table for a long moment. "He's going to be furious," he said. "Yes," I said. "He's going to be furious, and then he's going to listen, because Marcus has always been better at both of those than either of us gave him credit for." Walt left a little after 5. I stood at the kitchen window and watched his car pull out of the driveway, and then I stood there a long while longer, looking at the maple Ruth planted in the corner of the yard, now enormous in the way trees get enormous when you stop noticing them growing. I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. I told him Walt would be calling. Marcus was quiet a moment, then asked, "How'd he look when he left?" "Like a man who'd just set down something heavy," I said, "and isn't sure yet what to do with his hands now that they're empty." Marcus made a sound that was half sigh, half laugh. "That sounds about right," he said. We talked 40 minutes about other things, his daughter, who'd just started walking and getting into everything, a renovation at the Veterans Hospital he was overseeing, the maple tree, which he hadn't seen since the fall, and which I described as getting genuinely out of hand in the specific, wonderful way maples do. When we hung up, I went out to the back porch and sat in the chair that used to be Ruth's, and I looked at the yard and the fence line and the tree and breathed for a good long while. The house was still mine. The documents were accurate. The number Walt had planned to offer would never appear on any real closing sheet, because the trust made that conversation moot before it could ever start. Somewhere across the river in Parkersburg, my older son was sitting with the weight of what he'd finally put down, trying to figure out what came next. That part wasn't mine to know. That was his, to work through with his own attorney and his own brother in the actual shape of his finances, once the managed version was finally retired for good. I'd made clear what I could work with and what I couldn't. The rest was his. Here's what I know now that I didn't 2 months ago. The test cost me more than I expected, not in dollars, but in the particular way that clarity always costs more than the comfortable fog you were living in before it. Walt failed the test in the garage, failed it completely, in the worst and most specific way a man can fail, the kind where the truth comes out of him before he even knows he's being asked a question. But at that kitchen table on Saturday, he did something the test was never built to measure. He told the truth when the truth was the only thing left, without managing it, without softening it, without one more attempt to walk it backward into something more comfortable. That's not nothing. It isn't absolution. But it isn't nothing either. I went inside that evening and watered Ruth's African violets on the windowsill the way I do most nights. And I made myself a real dinner and sat down and ate it at the table instead of standing at the counter, which I don't always manage to do. And I thought about a woman who ran the books of a 52-employee company for 19 years with a precision I never once matched, who probably would have seen straight through all of this months before I did, and who'd have handled it differently than I did, less architecture, less of the long game, more of the plain, direct conversation, said once, and said with more warmth in it than I managed. She'd probably have been right about that, too. But she wasn't here, and I handled it the only way I know how to handle anything, which is to build something sturdy, make sure it holds weight, and write down exactly what's true so nobody can argue with it later. The structure held. The truth got documented. For now, that was enough. If this one stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me which moment changed the air in the room for you. I read every single one. Hit that like button, subscribe if this is your first time here, and I'll see you next week. And if you've ever wondered what's really sitting underneath somebody who asks a few too many questions about your finances, let me leave you with this. A man who built a company out of a rented garage learned it in his own kitchen on a Thursday in March. You don't need a recording. You just need to give someone enough room to say the wrong thing, and they'll tell you everything before they even know you were asking.